Welcome back to another edition of Inside the Birds with an analytics viewpoint. And of course, I'm Geoff Mosher, and we bring back our analytics expert, Sam Finkel. You've heard and seen a lot of Sam, and just to amplify what a minute by minute world that NFL free agency is and how as we operate in real time, as soon as we finished our last pod where Sam did a really deep dive, giving advanced data on a lot of the Eagles newcomers through free agency, what happens? We put it out there, and bam, the Eagles signed another free agent. They bring in Azeez Ojulari. So Sam has generously said he'll come back on to break down Azeez Ojulari from a analytical standpoint. And then, of course, Sam, a legend, says goodbye. Brandon Graham retires, and you wanted to take a look back on his career and go into some of the analytics with that. So who knows what's going to happen once we're recording this show. Might have to do something again tomorrow because 3 other things happen in Eagles world.
Absolutely. That's the nature of the business.
It is. It is indeed the nature of the business. So let's start off with Azeez Ojulari, because now the Eagles' depth at the edge position looks a little bit better. And again, we'll hammer home the point that these are 1-year deals. You may have heard of these guys' names. They may have done something in the past, but the 1-year deal part of this is that they're not guaranteed to make the team, nor does it guarantee the Eagles from continuing to add to the position. However, with a guy like Josh Uche, who did have a very good 3rd year in league, and then Azeez Ojulari, Sam, another 2nd-round pick who had really long arms. I mean, this guy, I've always liked him just because of the build, and I always thought he was a nice, explosive, situational pass rusher. The Eagles bring him in, and we'll see what he can contribute here. But I want to start off with you with that. What sort of jumps out at you from an analytics standpoint with Azeez Ojulari?
Sure. Yeah. The first thing that really jumps out is the, relative sack numbers. So if you look at Azeez Ojulari's sacks per game, he has 0.54 sacks per game.
So about a little more than a half sack per game, right?
Yes. And if you look at Sweat, he was right around his career, 0.48. And that's better than Huff's at 0.32. And that's better than Uche's at 0.32 as well.
So if we're looking at a per snap basis, Azeez Ojulari actually has more sacks per snap than any of the other 3, Huff, Sweat, or Uche.
That is per game.
Per game, I'm sorry. Yes.
When you look at it per snap, the numbers kind of are a little bit different, actually. So Ojulari actually has the 2nd most. And who has the 1st most? Well, the Eagles' other signing at edge, Josh Uche, per snap. And so the way that we did this chart is sacks per snaps per 100. So what that means is out of 100 snaps, how often are you going to get a sack? So what this data says is Azeez Ojulari, every 100 snap is going to get about 1.4 sacks. When you look at Josh Sweat, his career average was 1.38, Huff 1.37, and Uche 1.53. So these guys make the most of the snaps that they are given, the limited ones.
Right. Sam, Ojulari has struggled with injuries throughout his career. He had a really nice rookie year. That's why I really, again, I liked him coming out of Georgia. Of course, he's another Bulldog. Had 8 sacks in 17 games, 13 starts for the Giants. The next year, very hurt, 7 games, only 5 starts, so not very productive. But it still had 5, to your point, still had 5.5 sacks in those 7 games. And again, it's not all about sacks. He also had 7 quarterback hits and 3 tackles for a loss. But the last 2 years, very interesting, right? He only has 2.5 sacks and 7 QB hits in 2023. And then under a new defensive coordinator last year, he plays only 11 games, only starts 5, but he has 6 sacks. So this is a guy who has managed to put up pretty good deal of production in a relatively low number of snaps compared to some starters around the league, or even compared to some other situational pass rushers.
Absolutely. And that's kind of one of the upsides that the Eagles are hoping they can bring in with this bargain deal. And again, I know we talked about it a little bit, but got to try to extrapolate from what you have. Can you project that he will be that successful given more snaps?
Right. And to your point, he played the most snaps he ever played in a year was his rookie year, 781. 27 quarterback hurries, and he averaged 1.3 sacks per 100 snaps, which is a little lower than a career average, but he played a lot more snaps. So obviously it's going to regress, but the fact that it's very close to his career average shows you if they can keep this guy healthy, they can really probably get a pretty good pass rusher here.
Yeah, that's at least what the data suggests. So
Right.
hopefully the Eagles can, keep him healthy and get him on the field as often as possible.
What stood out from Azeez Ojulari that, we just talked about some positives. Was there anything that stood out that sort of was a cause of concern or wasn't as glaringly positive?
Yeah. So when you look at the overall pressures, not just sacks, there is a little bit of a fall off, right? So if you look at his total pressures per snap out of 100, he's only generating pressure on about 5.9 exactly. But out of those 100 snaps, he was only generating about 6 pressures. And when you look at some of the other guys, Sweat on his career averaged around 7.09. Bryce Huff is around close to 10 at 9.79.
Wow.
Yeah. And Uche is at 10.05. So if you look at the, per snap and the one thing I will caveat a little bit is that this per snap basis is all snaps, right? So it's not just pass rush snaps. So it really kind of depends on what teams they're running against, because if the team's just running the ball, that's a missed opportunity, to get an actual pressure.
Right.
And then also I would like to say that the win rate is much lower for Ojulari compared to these other guys, like at a significant decrease. So Ojulari on his career is 7.83%. Sweat is 12.41. Huff is 18.24. And Uche is 15.38. So much lower than all the other guys.
Man, all right. So 2 conclusions to draw from what you just said. One, to me, Ojulari is sort of like the anti-Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham's almost infamous for creating so many pressures that other people use to get sacks. I mean, Brandon Graham's only once had double-digit sacks. That was the year after he came back from the Achilles. It was the year they go to the Super Bowl and lose to the Chiefs. I believe he had 11 sacks that year. That was his highest. But he's basically been 6, 7, 8. But he played a lot of snaps, and he's constantly causing disruption for other teams. It feels like, based on this data here, that Ojulari can get you sacks, but doesn't win as consistently as some of the other pass rushers. He just happens to be able to clean up and get not taking away. I'm not saying doesn't have his own explosion, but when you see he has more sacks, but not as necessarily as high of a win rate, it sounds like he's been a good cleanup artist.
Yeah, he's very efficient on the ones that he does win. And I think that's how you can characterize him. And I think it's almost the anti-Bryce Huff too, right? Because Bryce Huff has a very high win rate, but he doesn't often have a high sack rate.
Right. Second conclusion. When they signed Ojulari, who I was a big proponent of them signing before the free agency started, as in this kind of role, a 1 year, let's see what you got, prove it, because I liked it. I like the player. I wasn't as big on the Josh Uche signing, and we're not going to let analytics just completely steer and even you, as analytically driven as you are good at not doing that. But there are some good analytics here that are not just like really, really deep in the weeds stuff. Like win rate's a pretty good indicator of how you're doing on a down and down basis. Total pressures per 100 snaps also. Uche is pretty good here, and if he can get his stuff together, it seems like maybe the ceiling in this defense might be higher for him than Ojulari, just based on some of these advanced data metrics.
Yeah, I mean, if he can finish, he wins more, and he continues that throughout his career. I mean, there's definitely high upside for Uche as well.
Yeah, I mean, and both of these guys are going to be playing on a line that's going to feature Jalen Carter. It's going to feature Moro Ojomo. It's going to feature Jalix Hunt, Nolan Smith. So neither of these guys are going to be asked to always be the number one pressure generator. And there should, Sam, if we think of Jalen Carter as the guy who's going to command that center guard double team, there should be some one-on-ones on the outsides for both of these guys.
Yeah, and that's just up to them to take advantage of, the situation.
Right. Now, having said all that, you just mentioned all of the great numbers that Bryce Huff has produced in his career, including a win rate of over 18%, which is amazing, and a sacks per 100 snaps of over 1.3, right, which is close to what Ojulari's is and not too far away from Uche's is. And this guy could not perform a lick for Vic. But that's where you sort of get into environment and whether you're a stand-up guy or a hand-in-the-dirt guy. I think Uche and Ojulari have spent most of their career as stand-up edge rushers. So I don't think the transition here will be that difficult for them.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And it really makes sense when you look at the context of what Bryce Huff did, why the Eagles made that move. And I feel like they're going to get a lot of flack for it not necessarily working out, but his numbers scream like this is a guy you take a chance on.
Yes.
And I think that the Eagles may have learned their lesson with these two new signings, because these guys also scream you take a chance on, but you have significantly less capital, both draft and financial capital, that you're investing in these guys.
Yeah. And then obviously, if it doesn't work out for Ojulari and Uche, I don't know if there is a lesson to learn other than sometimes free agency works, sometimes it doesn't. You're right. They don't catch flack, or they should catch flack for Bryce Huff. They really don't catch a lot of it because they won the Super Bowl, because the guys they drafted wound up compensating. But to your point, it didn't work out for Devin White either. And it didn't work out for Greedy Williams a couple of years. There's a lot of these one-year guys, Terrell Edmonds, that it didn't work out for. I think the Eagles are really good at understanding that if they're going to be successful, it's going to come through guys that they drafted and developed. And you hope to just hit on enough guys like a Zach Bond, Chris Long many years ago, like Eric Blount. You hope to hit on the one-year guy, enough of them to compensate for the mistakes that are inevitable in free agency.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schulter, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
Let's go over to Brandon Graham, because, it's not just Josh Sweat now that Brandon Graham has announced his retirement. And we did a great podcast. When I say a great podcast, Adam and I really went through his career, took a walk down memory lane. One of my favorite guys to cover, somebody who I got to know pretty well closely earlier in his career, especially overcame, Sam, a lot of adversity. And I couldn't think of a Philadelphia athlete who became so beloved after really hitting rock bottom after the first 2 or 3 years of his career. You went through his career and used some of these advanced data metrics that we talked about with Uche and Ojulari. What jumped out to you going through Brandon Graham's?
So with Brandon Graham, we just look at his career, and this chart is his regular season and playoff career. Out of that, he had 8,005 snaps in 218 games. And I think that's just a testament to, his time in Philly over these 15 years. With there, he got 92 sacks, 99 QB hits, and 502 QB hurries for a total pressure of 693 over that 15-year span.
That is crazy. I mean, what a force to be like once he hit like year 5 or year 6, he became a pretty consistent force in the league. And I mentioned with Brandon, sometimes if you just look at sack numbers, right, it's misleading. In 2016, he had 5.5 sacks in the regular season, which is not a great deal. And he only wound up with, I think, 6 or 6.5 that year, right? But what stood out about that season from your research?
Yeah, it was a career high in total pressures, and it was a career high in win rate. He almost won at 24.5%. It was 24.4, which is an incredible win rate. It's truly elite.
Highest of his career also, definitely. And the pressures, you said 83, are not only the highest of his career, but sort of blow away. I mean, at least 6 or 7 more than any other years in his career.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he was the setup man. He was the John Stockton of the D line, because everybody else was getting sacks that year, and he only had 5.5, but everybody else was feeding off of his pressures.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important and underrated and underappreciated role. And that's just kind of the embodiment of who Brandon Graham was for this city and for this team.
So also that year, Sam, as you've researched, his total pressures per 100 snaps, 10.86, which is also the highest of his career. 60 quarterback hurries. I'm telling you, this might be the most impressive pressure-generating season for someone who did not even come close to double-digit sacks.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, and I don't think you'll find really anything else like it in the NFL throughout maybe even the history, I'd say.
Right.
It's really unprecedented.
Now, let's look at his 2022 season. The Eagles go to the Super Bowl. They have that historic pass rush that I believe had 70 sacks that year. What we forget about Brandon Graham is the year before, he tore his Achilles, right? Which at the age of 33, you're just hoping the guy can come back, play, and make some kind of impact for you. But what jumped out from that year in 2022?
Yeah, so if we look at the relative stats, out of 100 snaps, he was getting to the quarterback, sacking him 2.67 times and generating pressure 10.5 times. So again, that's another
third highest or fourth highest, I would think, of his career.
It's another really elite pressure generating season for him. So
Right.
coming off that Achilles, it's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you're coming off a major injury. You're 34 years old. You produced the highest number of sacks in your career, right? Your win rate is over 20%, which you just said is what would you consider an elite win rate? Anything over what?
I think anything over like 19%.
Right. There you go.
Elite.
Right. So he puts that's I think the third highest of his career in a win rate. His total pressures per snaps, you have it almost 11, right? Which is right up there with the third highest of his career. I mean, he was an animal.
Seriously, it was a great season for him.
And by the way, he still played over 500 snaps that season. Certainly not the most of his career, but more than he played in 2014 when he was 26, more than he played in the first 4 years of his career when he was sort of struggling and trying to find a role. So really, I mean, to be just a bionic man to be that good at 34.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, for sure. And he continued kind of on that trend. I mean, the sack numbers really never went back to what that career high was. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, he continued to win at a very high rate. He continued to get total good pressure on the quarterback and, decent sack numbers as winning the Super Bowl, obviously, this year and finishing his career after having two pretty significant injuries, one in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. And how about this one? A career win rate of 16%, which is really good. But last year, 2024, supposed to just be a role player. You got Bryce Huff. You got Nolan Smith. You still have Josh Sweat. Brandon Graham was supposed to be the fourth rusher, and the way things worked out, he was the starting edge for quite a bit and was having his best game of the season against the Rams when he tore his triceps, but the man still finished with a win rate at 15.1 per your data. That's only a little bit under his career win rate. And this is 36 years old at this point.
It's truly incredible.
I don't know. It's going to be a long time before the Eagles and maybe the league sees a player like Brandon Graham who can play this long, be this productive at that age, and is really as much of a setup man as he is a finisher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Sam, great work. Thanks for putting this stuff together. We appreciate it. Like I said, the way we operate here in real time, by the time I hit and record on this, the Eagles might have signed another player that will be analytically analyzing for another future podcast. But great stuff, and we'll have you on again soon.
Sounds good.
All right, for Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching another Inside the Birds Analytics Style.